A while back, I mentioned that the Frosties were my favourite piece of exotic armour in Destiny. This is still true, but if I was to make my favourite exotics class specific, then it would obviously be the Frosties for the Hunter, the Claws of Ahamkara for the Warlock, and for the Titan, it would easily be the Thagomizers. Which brings us into this episode of the Optimizing series. Being another Rise of Iron exotic, the Thagomizers haven't received too much time in the spotlight, despite being an excellent albeit situational exotic. There is actually a lot of similarities between the vanilla Titan exotic and Insurmountable Skullfort and the Thagomizers, with both being partially neutral, but biased towards the Striker subclass. I covered the Skullfort in this series a long time ago, and pretty much summed it up as being a poor man's Thagomizers, meaning it was pretty much a weaker version of the Thagomizers, and you should only probably use it if you didn't actually own the Thagomizers. In hindsight, that might have been a bit unfair, since the Skullfort does give you transfusion from the Striker skill tree, 2 melee charges, and a full melee charge on respawn. Interesting perks. But when you look at the Striker's skill tree, and perks like Overload already exist, which cools down your melee charge more quickly anyway, the usefulness of the respawn with melee energy perk sounds less appealing. Anyway, in my opinion now, I still rate the Thagomizers well above the Skullfort, so let's get back to it. Starting with the rerollable perks, the Thagomizers continue the trend with many other exotic gauntlets, where the melee attack speed perk is locked, and you can have either momentum transfer or impact induction, to allow your abilities to cool down each other. For almost all content, it's hard to go wrong with a faster melee attack speed. You can also reroll the final perk to any of the weapon loader perks, and in my case, I went with hand cannons. Since I typically use hand cannons anyway, this was convenient, since the stat roll was also at 96%, allowing these Thagomizers to be tier 12 capable. Before I move into the stat configuration, the exotic perk grants the Striker Titan's Amplified perk for free, and allows you to have 2 melee charges. So just looking at this exotic perk, it would seem to be inferior to the Skullfort, since it only has 2 bonuses instead of the Skullfort's 3, but getting Amplify for free with the Thagomizers is incredibly powerful if you spec correctly. Since Amplify is a melee perk, and these are gauntlets after all, I would like to spec with either a 525 or a 255 configuration. I'd probably be more inclined to go with a 525, but it's really open to preference. So I did mention that these gauntlets are partially subclass neutral, and they are, but if you really want to play as anything but a Striker and have 2 melee charges, use the Skullfort, since with the Spawn with melee energy perk, the Skullfort simply offers more. But if you are going to play as a Striker, Thagomizers all the way. Since you are already getting Amplify for free, you can either run Overload for a fast melee cooldown, or Discharge to deal damage in an area around the target you meleeed. The best choice for most situations is probably going to be Overload, since having your melee cooldown quickly is always nice, and given that Amplify grants a chunk of super energy for a melee kill, you can already see the potential of this build. Other perks are optional, but staples for me are always going to be Transfusion and Shoulder Charge. Before I get into the situations to use the Thagomizers, I'll make a quick note about the Discharge perk. I made a video a while back showcasing the power of Discharge and the Thagomizers in the pit and Crota's End, but it was really just a hey look at this cool thing you can do kind of video, since Crota's End wasn't brought to the current light level at the time. Well, Crota's End is back at current light level again, and the Thagomizer Discharge build has the potential to grant a full supercharge in one melee attack. The only problem is, the Thagomizers are already a situational exotic, and the Discharge build extends the situational nature even further, so that is why I recommend going with Overload for more all-around builds. So now that we've got the build, with Overload, Transfusion, and the free Amplify perk, where would we want to use this? I'll start with the Crucible since the answer is going to be easy. It's probably not going to be worth it. Having 2 melee charges is obviously good, but solid exotics like the Twilight Garrison and the Armamentarium are really hard to beat. The Thagomizers definitely can be used in PvP, but since Amplify is less ideal for that environment, the Skullfort will be more tuned to that arena, since respawning with melee energy and getting Transfusion are definitely geared to the Crucible. So PvE it is. And with Amplify granting a ton of super energy for a melee kill, you can have your Fist of Havoc up very often. In everyday content like strikes, Prison of Elders, and story missions, using the Thagomizers is a very fun way to play. This build is obviously going to be further enhanced by certain modifiers, like Arcburn, Brawler, and Airborne, but since you get 2 melee charges, it isn't hard to get a killing blow with a charged melee attack. The question is going to be, is this build worth using in the hardest content like raids? And the answer is, sometimes. It is nearly impossible to surpass the Defender Titan in raid utility and general awesomeness, but in some sections of raids where you fight lower level enemies like Thralls, Acolytes, Dregs, Vandals, Scions, Goblins, and Hobgoblins, you might have some success using the Striker Titan with the Thagomizers. So why did I say the Thagomizers were my favourite Titan exotic, particularly after I just said the Defender was obviously better? Simple. The Thagomizers are fun. After nearly 3 years, there has definitely been times where I felt the gamer's fatigue, where the game stops being a game and starts being a chore, and the Thagomizers breathe new life into the game for me. Obviously go with the Defender if you're doing something serious, or if your raid team is getting frustrated with you, but messing around with the Thagomizers and a Striker Titan can be very rewarding and challenging. I should mention, If you really want to go nuts with the melee build, try running Monte Carlo or the Wrath on the Machine fusion rifle with the 2-for-1 perk, and maximise your melee potential even further. Anyway, give the Thagomizers a go and have some fun. If anyone's interested in either the Skullfort video I made a while back, or the full supercharge from 1 melee attack video, I'll link both in the description below. Thanks for watching, guys.